Okay, we are live and have had some craziness going on this morning with internet down, and we're back up and running. Lights are on, so hopefully hopefully folks are still here to join. And I can see now there's a bunch of people joining. Okay, great. So today we're going to be talking about data-driven color schemes. And similar to what I did last week, I want to start you off with one thing that I really want to make sure that you learn from this presentation. And I'll go ahead and just start by sharing my screen. And this is a file that we recently uploaded into the online examples within DataGraph. I just brought this up this morning. And this is a file that uses a color scheme, and this is data driven. So the one thing that I want you to know whenever you're working with color schemes in DataGraph, the first thing is that down here in the bottom left, this is where we have our color scheme. This is called, we call this a color scheme variable because you can use it in various places. And notice how all of these graphs share a common color palette. Okay, so the one thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of that we have in the program is that if you click on the gear menu within this color scheme variable, there we go, whoops, then there is an option for color suggestions. And immediately you'll see pop up this list of all of these various color schemes that are built into DataGraph. If you've never used this before, this is where you build and work with data-driven color schemes. And these color schemes are not schemes that we came up with. These come from a website called Color Brewer. These were originally designed specifically for mapping applications, but they are, this is a great set of color schemes, and there's all sorts of different types of color schemes in here. So if I decide I want different colors for my graphs here, where again, you can see these all have the same basic color palette in them, I can go to this gear menu, click on my color suggestions, pick a different color scheme, and now all of my graphs have been updated. So this is a really handy way to, again, really make use of what's in the program and not have to create everything from scratch. Though I will show you how to do that today. We're going to first talk about, just in general, what is a data-driven color scheme and define the different types of them. We're going to talk about how to create data-driven color schemes in DataGraph, like the one that you see here, and both automatically, manually, and I'll show you some examples of that. So anyway, let me see. I want to make sure that I have the chat open. If there are any questions that you have, please feel free to pop them in on the chat. Always happy to hear from you. And with that, let's just go ahead and get started and talk about what do I mean by a data-driven color scheme. And we'll, just to illustrate this first with this file that we have here. For example, this first graph is using a bar command, and the each bar has a different color, and you can see how there is also a we have a our legend here that shows us, it's actually sort of duplicating information because we show the same thing here, but you can see what that looks like. But if we just want to focus on this particular data set, I'll just hide this other data, that's creating this bar graph. There is a column for category and a column for the data itself. And if I change the category for any of these, notice how my color now changed. So the colors are encoded based on the category that I have within my data table. So if I change this one to A, it's going to change to that color there. So that's what I mean by data driven. And if you want to go over here, first of all, you can download this file. If you go into the online examples, then you'll see this basic graphs and color scheme is now a file that we have in the examples, so that you can go in and open up this color scheme. And what you see is the way that the color scheme is set up. It's set up to match these categories from A to E, and it gives these particular colors based on that match. So the types of data-driven color schemes that you can have them be based on text data. You can use numerical data. You can have ranges of numerical data be used to define a particular color. So again, it's all data driven. Now, if you happen to be here last week and we talked about the colors within the main section of the user interface in the style settings, those and we were talking about that a lot last week in terms of how to use the style settings to really make formatting a custom theme and formatting custom colors. But none of those that we did then were data driven. It was setting the line styles, and I won't go through that in too much detail today. But again, this is really overriding those colors and using the colors here. Okay. So it's a great question actually on the discussion already, which let me share this one with you. So is there any connection between what color you use for certain data, or is it simply up to the creator to decide? And this is really where, in fact, I think this leads in very well to the next topic, which is talking about the different general categories of color schemes. And to do this, because definitely the type of data you have is going to make a difference. And in this particular example that I've showed you, this is categorical data. I have a category column that I've assigned to my data, and based on that category, I'm applying a color. And all of these, the pie chart does the same thing. If you want to look at that data, I can, change the category within my data table, and it's going to change the color on my pie graph. But really, in this case, these the categorical color scheme, like you see here, is really just meant to distinguish between the individual components of a graph. So we want them to be visually something that we can distinguish, as opposed to the other color schemes that we'll talk about. Now, let me actually just create a brand new file, because what I want to do is just show you quickly how do I actually create these, and then I'll show you these different types depending on what your data is like and how you want to use them. So first, here's a blank data graph file. We'll go ahead and add a number column, and I'm just going to, again, do something really simple. We'll just do numbers 1 to 5 to start with. And we'll use the command that I was showing you before. This is the bar command. I will say not every command in DataGraph can use a data-driven color scheme. The bars command, for example, which we used in the presentation last week, that is not data-driven. It will use the colors that are in our style settings that are up here. And if you missed last week, that's these colors that are here, for example. Again, these are kind of like little line color 1, line color 2. These are sort of built-in color variables within a particular graph, not data-driven, however. So for this particular graph here, if I want to add a color scheme, I'm going to expand my bar, and I'm going to go to this section here where it says fill with, and I can change this from fill with a solid color to fill with a color scheme. When you do that, and all these commands that have the color scheme option, data-driven color scheme, are very similar in that they'll then have another box that will pop up and it will ask you, well, what column do you want to use to color these bars or whatever it is that you're coloring? And you don't have to choose the same column as the data itself. You can choose any column that's in your data tables. For now, I'm just going to choose the same column. Once I've done that, then it's going to pop up one more box, and it will then allow me to choose a color scheme I've already created or create one from scratch. Now, choosing the create color scheme option is what I often do because it just creates it for me automatically. Now it has a color scheme, and there you have your color scheme variable. You can create them from scratch. If you go to the other drop-down menu, there is an option for adding a color scheme. When you do that, what you'll see is there's nothing in it because I haven't associated it with any, again, it's just creating it from scratch. And I would have to add, you can click here to add different colors to it, and then say, what are you matching? So you can do it from scratch. I'm going to focus a bit more on the fact that I can have this automatically because it is so convenient. So this automatic one that I created, again, this really handy trick, come to your gear menu, click on that, go to the color suggestions, and then I can pick from these different color schemes. So now back to, I think, the question that you had, which is related to, how do you choose a color scheme? Well, if I had categorical data where I was interested in just having something that distinguished well between the different data, so I could use the colors to identify some category, then the first few color schemes that you have in this list are all appropriate for categorical types of data. They distinguish between, this one is showing you, there's one color that's a little bit darker than the others. But in general, these are sets of colors that are meant to be distinguished between them. Now, these are not necessarily all colorblind friendly. So in Color Brewer, if you go to the Google Color Brewer, go to their website. I think it's colorbrewer2.org is actually their website right now. You can find information on each one of these color schemes and find an evaluation of how well it works for different types of color deficiencies. Okay, and again, these are all, we didn't make these up, these all come from Color Brewer. So the next set of color schemes that you have, these are considered to be sequential color schemes. And these have the colors not just indicate, distinguish between our different bars, but they actually have an increasing color depth with the increase in the number itself. Now, again, for all of these, if I change my data, then it's going to change the color in the bar as well as the height of the bar itself is also going to change because that's the way I set it up. I have my color scheme right now dependent upon the same column that is drawing my data. So that's my sequential color scheme. The other type of color scheme that we have is called a divergent color scheme. And the divergent color schemes are all shown down here. So if I wanted to, for example, indicate, now this would not be a colorblind friendly color scheme at all, but if you wanted to show something going from, hot to cool with red and green, this would be an example of a divergent color scheme. You also have red versus blue. Now here's a trick. In this case, I really want maybe my red to be associated with my bigger bar that I have here. So to do in DataGraph, you can reverse the color scheme at any time, reverse the order that they're set up in. So if you click on your gear menu, go to color suggestions, down at the bottom, you'll see that there's an option for reverse colors. And now the reds are at the top and the blues are at the bottom. Let's see, is there anything else? Okay, so the other ones that I want to show you are just, actually, it doesn't, in this case, I don't have it yet. So there's a spectral color scheme. This is kind of similar to a rainbow, but one of the things that I guess to be aware of, so let's just say that I have a lot more colors. Let's go to 10 colors. At some point, what will happen in the color suggestions is that you'll have less colors available. So I'm still at the point where I have my full 10 colors. Now the color scheme itself isn't updated if I change my data. So I do have to go back into my color menu and go back to my color suggestions, and I can go ahead and pick one of these. Oh, actually, there's one more thing you need to do. So I need to update the the values that are in here. So if I go ahead and set my color scheme so that it is, again, now it has all of the categories in here, all 10. I did that by saying unique text values, or I could say unique values. These are numbers, so either way would work. Now I have 10 colors in my color scheme, and you see how the color scheme variable has less options available. So not every color scheme that Color Brewer created had had more than 10 colors in it. The divergent do, the paired color scheme. This is one that I have found for occasionally for some. It depends on the data set, but this occasionally has been a really great color scheme to use. Where for me, where I have data that is paired like this, and then the rainbow now shows up. So if you want the rainbow color scheme, now the rainbow color scheme is one that has gotten some controversy because of maybe its overuse sometimes in showing data that really should be using more of a divergent type of a color scheme like this. However, the great thing about the rainbow color scheme is that you can have a lot of categories and it still will produce a range of colors for you. So for categorical data where you're distinguishing between a lot of categories, I mean, I've done this before with data on the states, for example, where I just give each state a unique color with the rainbow color scheme. And it helps you to, distinguish between different data. So now what I've done is added 2 more categories. I'm going to go back to my gear menu, go to color suggestions. Now you see you have even less. So there, if you go above a certain number, and here I'm at 12, I still have the paired, I have this set, but there, sure enough, there's my rainbow color scheme. So the rainbow, I think, is there no matter how many categories we add. The other thing that you can do to be aware of is that you can, in here, well, you certainly can create your own custom color scheme by clicking on any of these tiles. There you get the color picker. You can pick a certain color, or you can go in and you can specify, go to the RGB sliders to specify a hex code. This is one of the things we talked about last week too, that I'm really looking to have a way to just input a comma-separated list of hex codes as an easy way to get a color scheme that you create, because there's so many tools out there for creating color schemes or that have color schemes out there. Anyway, the thing that we have in here that I think is kind of cool is you can take one of the first tile, and let's go ahead and just pick a light color for that. And then I'm going to leave my last tile the same. This is a dark red. And if I go now to my color suggestions, the last thing here that you have is this color range. And then it just will automatically take whatever the first color is and the last color is, and it blends them together to create a color scheme. So again, if you have a lot of categories you need to color sequentially, this is a really handy way to do this. Now, the other thing I guess I want to just point out to you with this color scheme variable is that you'll notice how right now I'm still using all unique values, but because this is a numerical column, it also has the option for doing ranges of values. And it gives you, if you have what we currently have, every number has a value that would be 12 ranges, but I could say I want to use a stride of 2. So well, actually, let me just select it and you'll see what it does. So now it gives a color for one color for 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10. And these are continuous. So if my bar here is 12, 0.8, then it's going to change the height of this, and it's also going to change the color associated with that. And actually, a cool thing with the bars command is that you can also have the location on the y-axis be based on a column. So I changed this where value to be an actual number. Okay, so we've talked about the different types of color schemes: categorical, divergent, sequential. We've talked about how to create them in DataGraph with this one example. Let me show you another example that I have that I think is a nice illustration. This is another file that I uploaded. So if you go to online examples and look at this one, motor vehicle crash data, which I should already have here. Here it is. This illustrates these various types of color schemes. And you can see there's a whole bunch of them that I have set up here. So there's a categorical scheme, one that I call categorical and sequential, another larger sequential one, divergent. You can also do color ramps here and choose those from the same menu where you choose the color schemes, even though we don't create them automatically. But in this example, you can see how I have, this is actually an image that the CDC for the US created this. This is actually 2013 data. The file does have a link to where I got this infographic from. And this, I just thought this was sort of interesting because it's, well, first of all, the data is comparing motor vehicle crash deaths, comparing across 10 countries, and it groups them according to the highest, the middle, and the lowest. And I don't know how well you guys can see this from where you're looking at it. But what's interesting here is the colors don't correspond to these groups. So to me, this is maybe a little bit of a mistake in how they set this up, because the colors, there's one color for the highest, but then there's another color here for these top 3 middle countries. There's another color here for Spain and Switzerland, and another color here for the UK and Sweden. So the colors actually don't match the categories that they show on the left-hand side. So among the many options that I set up here to illustrate is one where I set up a color scheme that has, that uses those categories, the high, the middle, and the low, to define the colors. And if you want to look at the color scheme that does that, it's over here on the left-hand side, and it has the lowest, the middle, and the highest. Now, for all of these, I guess be aware that the color scheme itself, each one of these is a line that you can actually drag and move around. So if you need to change the order and then you do the assignment of the color scheme, that's sort of a good thing to realize. But let me show you some of the other options that I set up in here. For example, this one is, again, categorical. It's really the color is not meant to distinguish between the different bar lengths. I just picked a color that was sort of similar to the color in the flag. And how do I do that? Again, this is with the color picker. So if I click on one of these tiles within my color scheme, I can go and use, this is what I did, I used the color dropper to come over to the little flag images that I have here and click that, and then it assigns the color to that tile. So this is, again, it's a match, and it's matching the text that's actually in this column. So if I changed, just to illustrate, again, if I copy Canada and move it to this one, then, oops, I didn't do that right. Copy, paste. There we go. Then the color would change according to that. It's also changing the label that's in there. Okay, let's not, let me try to undo that. Okay, so the other options that are here, again, this is a sequential color scheme, but it also has these categories, high, mid, and low. So it's not numerically sequential. But that's one of the things I thought was interesting actually about this data, is that the top bar really is very different than these other bars. The US has quite a considerable higher number of crashes per, or crash deaths per 100,000 people. So I might want to actually make that clearer by encoding my bars based on the numerical value. And when you do that, you get something that looks more like this. And this is an automatic setting that I used, again, just creating these automatically using 5 different categories here. And it really brings attention to the fact that this bar is so much larger, rather than grouping the US with New Zealand and Canada, which have a much, much lower number of crash deaths. Now I can have more categories. So this is a very similar one. It's also sequential, but it has 8 different categories associated with it. I can use a divergent. Maybe I want to highlight the fact that, these are, again, slightly, lower than the countries here. Then the divergent color scheme can help to kind of bring notice to that. And finally, this is one that's using a color ramp that is also set up to be divergent, where we have the red color and then the blue color down below. Now, for this data, again, I think it would really, what I would choose would depend not just on these countries, but on other countries as well. And, is this particularly an issue in Sweden, or is this a very low number globally? Then I might want to use a divergent color scheme to show that, this is so much lower than other countries. So that's how I would kind of judge for this particular data. And I do also have a color ramp here that shows you the color schemes for this one. So I wanted to just check in. See, I'm not seeing any other questions. If you have any, please let me know. If you have any color scheme questions or any other questions that you want to ask, please feel free. I want to show you one other important aspect of using the color schemes, and one of the reasons why I think if you're doing data-driven graphics like this and you want to use the color schemes, once you create one of these, all of these objects that you've created over here not only can be used throughout a single file, but they can be used across files. So for example, if I want to use this categorical scheme in another file, all I have to do is, once I've created it, I can select it, I can highlight it, say edit copy, we'll just go to a new file and paste it. And sure enough, I've got my my color scheme here. Now it's not connected to anything. I don't have anything else in this graph, but now it's something that I could select when I'm creating a graph. A great question. I'd like to know how the flags are included in that chart. Andrew, that's a very good question. I probably should have mentioned that. So if you go to the within this file, there's a group that I created that's called flags, and if I open this up, you actually see an image for each one of these flags. These show up as currently very, very tiny within the viewer. Maybe I could make this a little bit bigger so that you could see. So sure enough, there's my Canadian flag. So I manually brought each one of these images in, and it's not too hard to do. I don't know if I can have luck just demoing this right off the bat. So for any of these flags, if I want to, I don't know, I guess I'll just pick, if I download these, save image to downloads, and go into my downloads file. Here it is. So here I have an image file that I brought in, and if I say, let me say DataGraph file, new, show you, here we go, here's my downloads. I can go ahead and, not drag it there, but drag it. You see where I'm putting it over in my command list. So now that brought the flag into this file, and that's what I did for each one of these. I brought the flags in. And then what I did is I actually set this up so that each one of these is its own little image here. So I have a very small size that I made with these, so that it would crop right around the image itself. I'm not, drawing any X or Y numbers. Actually, the way I'd really create this from the start is I would start with a, what I should have done when I brought that in is say new graph for composition. And then that gives you this blank slate that you can, again, I sized them, as you can see here, very small. But then you could paste an image into this. And now this graph, or, within my file that has the flag in it is just the flag. That's the only thing that's in here. And then in my other graphs, well, this is actually just a screenshot of the original one. But if I go to my graph here, you can see how this is set up in various groups. So I have a group where I have all the flag images that I brought in. And I mean, this took me, did take me a little bit of time to set this up, but now that it's set up, I think it's pretty cool. So what I did was I have the image is it's using a graphic command where if you open this up, you see how you can select from any of these images. You can also do this really quickly by just, if you're creating a new graph for composition, again, to bring things together, you can then just drag these in. Oops. There we go. Again, drag the image. So now this image is in this other file. So I have the image that I brought in. I'm using a graphic command to include it within my graph here. And then let me show you how, for every one of these, I'm using a variable to set the location in my X and my Y. So it has there's a scale, there's an X and Y location, and each one of these, because it's set up as a variable, I can go over to my variable list and show you this. And there's a group for the flags. And for example, the variable that I set up here for scale, this allows me to scale the graphics larger or smaller. This is a technique that I if I know I'm going to be putting in a lot of images like this, or I don't know, just the same that are going to need the same settings, I try and figure out how can I use a variable so that if I change my mind and I need to, scale them, that I'm not going to have to go into every single one and change it in every single place. So I have the same thing. I have an offset here in between them that I set up, and that's something that I can dynamically change if I needed to add more countries or change my height. And the same thing with my X and Y location. So these are located in space, and if I change either of these sliders, it kind of moves it around. Oh, and in fact, in this case, I wanted to set up the titles to match where my flags were, and so I have this. This is all using the same variable. So anyway, it did. It took a little bit of setup, uh, but not terrible. And it's a matter of just copying and pasting. And for these, for each flag as it goes down the list, it has a multiplier. So I'm using this offset value, and for the first one, I don't have one. Then I just have the offset. Then I have the offset times 2. Then I have the offset times 3. Then I have the offset times 4. So maybe not something you want to do all the time, but for this infographic, I found this to be a handy way to set this up and make it easy for me to change around. Anyway, so let's see, is there anything else that I want to really comment on in terms of the color schemes themselves? Yeah, I hope that this is something that you can definitely experiment with. I have found doing this a lot. And one of the things, I guess, I was thinking about this last week too. Someone was talking about, some of the things they find tedious. That if there is something that you are repeating over and over again in DataGraph, and and you're feeling like, oh, I wish there was a better way, you definitely let us know about that, because often there might be a better way. We really do try to ourselves not do tedious work. That's one of the reasons I really wanted to make sure, again, that, in setting up color schemes, that there's this list here that's built in. You don't have to create them all from scratch. You can, but you can utilize those built-in color schemes. I think what I'll do just for, let's see, I had these other files, so I believe we talked about this. Oh, I know we went through this file. Maybe we didn't look at this one that I had set up as much. So this is actually just, again, illustrating what we talked about. This is the default color scheme when you do the color scheme from scratch. Then I have a paired, a sequential, a divergent, and then I have one that's a spectral color scheme. So one thing I think, just to show you, if you're working in a file where you've created a series of color schemes, let me do a different, I've done this a lot with bars. Let's do this with a different type of drawing command. Let's just add the pie chart, for example. And again, within the detail, you see there's an option for colors. Right now it's specifying, but if you say from column, and then you pick the column that you want to base the color scheme on, so our category. Now, this is different from the first time that I did this. Now, when you pick the drop-down menu, you'll see all these color schemes that I've created within this file. So it's just showing me all of these color schemes here. So again, I can create a brand new color scheme, and it will use whatever the categories are within the column I've chosen to base this on to set it up, or I can just pick one that I've already created. And that's what is really illustrated in not in this file, sorry, I'm in that file, in this file here, where again, you have all of these color schemes, the same color scheme being used in these different commands, so that if I want to change my color scheme, I change it in one place and all of my graphs update. And that was what I showed you right in the beginning of the webinar. So again, this is probably the most important thing I really wanted to make sure you realize when you're creating these, that you'll see this list. The number of tiles across a color scheme will depend on the number that you're requesting based on what's in your list, but it will automatically populate for you. And again, data driven. So if I change my data, my color schemes change. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and I'll sign off for now. And let's see, I'm still thinking about next week. We will also have a presentation. I'm thinking about topics for next week. And if you have any suggestions, feel free to send them our way. And I hope that everyone has a good weekend. And thanks for participating today. We'll go ahead and end the broadcast now.